It was during our 2008 family vacation. My family, which included my wife Frances and our son Benny, decided to go on vacation in Northern California. We had always wanted to camp out among the redwoods, and we had heard of a campground that Frances's family used to go to, so we thought it would be the perfect excursion, and at first it was. We were all having a blast, going on hikes and watching all the wildlife running around. There were quite a few trails surrounding the cabins that we got to stay in, so we decided that every day we would go hiking down a different trail. That way, we could enjoy as much as we could during our 2-week stay. It was our 4th day in, and after eating some breakfast, we all got our backpacks and water bottles ready and decided to head down one of the greener trails. This one hadn't been as cleared off as other ones we had gone down in our earlier days at camp, but we weren't concerned. It was still clearly a path, and it hadn't seemed likely that we would lose it or get lost on it. We made our way down the trail as we gawked at the beautiful trees and flora along the trail. It was absolutely beautiful, at least until it was interrupted by something. As we walked, none of us were talking. We had just been enjoying the sounds and sights around us when all of a sudden, we heard the sound of footsteps walking in the dirt behind us. I stopped and turned around to see who or what might have been following us, but I didn't see anything. I figured it had to been a deer or something and was not a big deal, but we were all still a bit on edge and decided to head back to the campground and hang out near the cabin while we calmed down. The rest of the day was uneventful, and eventually we all turned in to go to sleep, and just as my eyes began to get heavy, I heard the sound of something shuffling around outside our cabin. I sat up and was getting ready to walk to the door to check it out when all of a sudden a voice from outside calmly asked, "Can I help you?" I wasn't sure if they were talking to me or if there was something else going on, but then I heard the sound of footsteps walking up the porch of the cabin, and again I heard them ask, "Can I help you?" Only now they were right on the other side of the door. Frances and Benny had both woken up this time, and Frances looked at me wondering what was going on. Then, without any of us saying a word, we all heard the sound of the footsteps leaving the porch and then the campground. I immediately sprang up and made sure the door was locked and moved the dresser in front of it. Frances and I spoke about it and decided that the next day we would all walk through the trail back to our car and leave the campsite early. We didn't think it was safe anymore. So after a long night, just waiting and wondering if the person was going to come back, thankfully they didn't. At least not that we know of. The next morning, we all packed up as quickly as we could and began making our way down the trail and to our car. It was about a 10-minute walk, so we weren't expecting anything to happen. But then, out of nowhere, just like the day before, the sounds of footsteps from behind us. And this time, we knew it was the person who had visited our cabin last night. I told Frances and Benny to run, and I followed behind them, placing myself between them and whoever was following us. As we ran to the car, we could hear yelling through the trees. All they kept saying was, "Can I help you?" The yelling progressively got more aggressive, but we managed to make it safely back to the car. As soon as we were inside, we locked the doors and pulled off. As we were leaving, all 3 of us saw a man wearing a torn-up flannel and blue jeans walking out of the woods with a sinister grin on his face. As we sped off, I could see him waving in the rearview mirror. If you ever find yourself wanting to take a trip to the Amazon rainforest, and maybe even an excursion down the Amazon River, I have 2 pieces of advice for you. One is to make sure you have a guide to take you that knows the area. And 2, just don't do it. I learned that lesson one of the hardest ways possible. A friend and I decided to do just that. We managed to find a guide that was willing to take us on a 3-day trip down the Amazon River and into the forest. And at first, it was as amazing as you would expect. I mean, don't expect crystal clear waters at the Amazon, but the beauty was literally everywhere. In the animals, in the trees, it was great. The river itself was nice. It wasn't rapid or super fast. And for the most part, we just sort of drifted along for a while. Our guide spoke English, so it was easy to communicate. And he warned us of 2 things: don't go in the water and stay near the camp at night. 2 things that we were aware of, but very happy to hear. However, we would never make it to a campsite. As we floated down the river, out of nowhere, our boat, which was just big enough to fit the 3 of us plus some gear, smashed into something. It was likely a large rock under the surface, but whatever it was, it caused the boat to capsize and threw the 3 of us in the water. I swam to the surface and began looking around, and shortly after I noticed our guide and my buddy surfaced, and our guide began yelling for us to go to shore. We all swam as fast as we could and luckily were able to pull ourselves out of the river before anything serious happened. After checking that we were all okay, our guide looked around and said he knew where we were and that it would be a good idea to set up a fire and try to survive the night. We didn't like the idea, but we really didn't have a choice either. So we all hunkered down and began setting up for a long night in the Amazon. That was a sleepless night for all of us. We were surrounded by the constant sound of animals hissing and growling nearby. Every time one of us would get freaked out, our guide would try to calm us down by saying that the fire is going to keep them away. Come to find out, after we made it out of the situation, that if anything in the forest had been hungry enough, the fire wouldn't have stopped anything. The next day, as soon as the sun poked its head up, we began making our way back to the village that we set off from. It was about an 8-hour hike, but thanks to our guide, we made it back in one piece. It's funny how fast beauty fades when you find out how deadly something is. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have 400 pounds of pressure per square inch pulling at the back of your leg? It's not a pleasant feeling, and one that I hope I never experience again. You see, I was on a solo outing in the Colorado mountains, and it was just supposed to be a simple camping trip, but it turned into a nightmare. At first, things were going fine. I found a place to set up my camp, and I had brought a decent supply of food and a good book to read. I was very happy with how the weekend was turning out. This was until nightfall. On the 3rd night there, I was just about to turn in for the evening when I heard a low growl in the distance. The first thought that came through my head was that it was a mountain lion. My eyes began scanning the tree line and up in the trees, and sure enough, I froze when I saw the reflection of 2 big yellow eyes pointing right back at me. I decided that it would probably be smart to stay away of the cat and not go to sleep yet, so I kept fueling the fire and watched the glowing eyes as calmly as I could. My blood pressure would spike any time the eyes would disappear for a moment, but they would always show up again after a second, but in a slightly different spot. The next day rolled in, and with it came the daylight. The cat didn't let me get a single ounce of sleep, and in the morning it was still watching me. I knew that it wasn't going to leave me alone, so my best bet was to pack up as calmly as possible and try to make it back to my car. The thing is, you aren't supposed to turn your back on a mountain lion, especially if you think it's stalking you. But I had to walk down the trail back to my car, so it was inevitable. Sure enough, as soon as I gave it a second, I heard the shuffling behind me, and all of a sudden my leg had this warm sensation running through it. The sensation was quickly followed by shooting pain as the mountain lion who had gotten a good grip on my left calf, was pulling me backward to try to carry me into the woods with it. I did my best to fight, but there wasn't much I could do. Luckily, my screams alerted a nearby hiker who came sprinting down the trail, throwing rocks as he came up to us. The mountain lion ran off, thankfully, leaving me on the trail. The man carried me to the end of the trail and called an ambulance. At the end of the day, I needed 28 stitches in my calf, and I went through 14 months of physical therapy so that I could walk properly. The doctor who worked on me said that I was the second person in his career that he had seen after a mountain lion attack.